This is called A Mouse in the Dark. There's a clip where Robert Plant appears in polka dot shirt and trousers tight saying, "Thanks for 11 years." Thus ending Led Zeppelin's second night at Nebworth, August 1979, a gig which wasn't meant to be John Bonham's swan song in the UK. In less than a year he'd passed away, and though I attended that one or two concerts, the story I here relate concerns not the band so much as a mate along with other people I once knew, all given aliases as their real names are best left anonymous, I feel. It wasn't my first all-day festival attendance. I've been to a few before, though Nebworth I remember best of all, and I've since been to a few more, but farther from the stage I've never been. The crowd was the largest I've ever seen. I hope we were near a Portaloo the night before, having been resigned to taking a dump in the open air, crouched by a bush and exposed by a torchlight shone by the stewards with mirthful delight as I wiped in resignation and despair. And of that anecdote I've more to tell, along with a few others as well. "What's the time, Graham?" "10:15. "When's the first band on?" "I don't know, 3, at least 5 hours. I'll skin up again. Can I nick a fag, Graham? Cheers, G." Graham, Troy, Jim and yours truly, the previous day, had duly arrived by train late afternoon, and seeing as it would be dusky soon, we pitched up the tent in the nearest spot. Or I should say, Graham pitched up his small tent while we basically took the piss, drinking warm lager and smoking pot, using tobacco from Graham's cigs, the same as we'd done at previous gigs. Jim toked on my badly rolled joint, sucking, frowning and sucking once more. "It's too tight," he said. "There's no fucking point," adding, in a tone I tried to ignore, as usual, upon handing it back to me, and I, achieving the same lack of success, winced involuntarily. Even now I wince occasionally, recalling, dwelling painfully on the barbed remarks he often dealt, impervious to how I felt upon being addressed disdainfully, and though I never once heard him say "you cunt," I felt like one anyway. The two-man tent being pitched, Graham stood surveying his work. "It's a bit small, but I reckon it's probably good enough. None of us are all that tall." Jim, needing a pee, walked hurriedly to a dome marquee which supposedly contained toilets, and as the night drew there was a breeze. It was chilly too. I tried to catch eyes with good-looking girls as Graham, Troy and I made our way to a party of sorts where hippies lay, stoned. Spuds on a bonfire were cooking as Jim showed with Claire, a girl he'd met in the dome, where they'd had a tete-a-tete. August 1979. New Wave was king of the music scene. Punk had been, for a while, in decline. Debbie Harry was a post-punk queen. Tunes by the likes of the Boomtown Rats and Squeeze, remember Call for Cats, were repeatedly played in nightclubs and on jukeboxes in cafes and pubs. But, hold up, you say? New Wave, Squeeze and the Boomtown Rats were not so. My dear pedantic reader, I know. Allow me some poetic licence, please. They charted well, not least the top 10, though both were indeed pub rock back then. In any case, that night in Hertfordshire I travelled back in time a decade prior to that long ago year, while smoking a joint expertly made, passed to me by an aged hippie whose ramblings, exceedingly trippy, filled the vacuum left by the cease of guitar and bongos. Here follows a piece, a fragment of wisdom he shared. "A mouse in the dark is deadlier than a tiger." And that's the truth, man. I nodded sagely, and he declared as a large log on the bonfire caught flame, "Your Genesis top. I've got one the same." Suddenly, it seemed like the gathering entire had focused attention on me in anticipation of how blathering my reply to the hippie might be. And when he, with an inquisitive frown, asked, "Did you buy that The Lamb Lies Down tour, Earl's Court, in '75? I responded with a face-saving lie. "Yeah, what a gig. Peter Gabriel was great. What do you think of his solo stuff?" But he'd evidently had enough. "I can't say I ever heard it, mate." And with that, he wrapped himself up tight in a blanket and went out like a light. Grateful for this reprieve, I turned with a smile as I passed the joint to Claire and wasn't at all concerned when Jim, re Lavies, touched on a point which later touched me considerably. "There's no toilet in the marquee, but I only needed a piss," he said, "so I had one in a bush instead." It was quite cold and the fire was dying, but Graham and Troy seemed cosy enough, albeit crashed out, sleeping rough on the grass, and there's no denying when Claire said, "Leave 'em, let's go to your tent." Jim and I nodded in mutual assent. Earlier on, I'd chatted with Claire, who incidentally was my age, i.e. 18, and very pretty too, about things rock-related, namely Led Zeppelin. She being of the view their best album was Zeppelin 2. I asked if she was here alone, and she said yes, she was on her own, but was meeting her friend by the main gate tomorrow, and now she needed somewhere to sleep, which Jim offered with room to spare, a large tent that could sleep at least 8. Yes, he was devious through, and Claire, in retrospect, probably knew. There in the tent, the three of us lay, with Claire in the middle. I tried to prepare, in the dark, a half-decent spliff, which I was hoping to share with Claire, who, I suppose I may as well admit, I'd fallen in love with a little bit. Please don't laugh. This story's impact would lessen in wanting of the fact that I was green in actuality, and Claire's age, along with her prettiness, already mentioned in parentheses, combined with our commonality in music, formulating in my mind a potion, making us two of a kind. I nudged her gently, but she gave no response. Jim was dozing, snoring. I tried sleeping too, but couldn't let go. Was Claire asleep or simply ignoring me? After what seemed like an age, I could feel the beginnings of a rage inside, and as time dragged, it got worse and worse, and I uttered a curse, and the rage grew into a thundering wind, and I knew from experience this wind was a prologue to an immense tempest. Oh God, an intense, sundering, bell-breaking pain. I couldn't stand it. In short, I was dying for a shit. "For fuck's sake, what are you trying to do?" asked Jim as I clambered over him. I couldn't say I was dying for a shit, else my Casanova credentials be obliterated in Claire's eyes, though she was irritated as well, going by the gasp she gave. So, in a futile attempt to save face, I said, "I think I might have dropped my Zippo somewhere or by the bonfire." "And I'm sure," Jim muttered, "you liar. But a tortoise can rarely be stopped once it's decided to rear its head." So I ignored Jim and from the tent fled. I headed for the Dome Marquee in haste, and on recalling what I'd been told about the lack of bodily waste provisions, I put the tortoise on hold and approached a few stewards standing in front of the main gate, disbanding gate crashers, bidding no doubt to get close to the stage, hence receiving a dose of verbal abuse and maybe a touch of physical. There was some hedgerow behind which the stewards I begged to go, as I needed a dump so very much. "Yeah, but don't take forever," said one. I was there in a flash, with flies undone. "Don't worry, I won't leave a mess. I've got a bag, I'll throw it in the bin," said I, in a state of half undress from behind a bush, having shat in a discarded crisp bag, no mean feat, and presently wiping clean with an old sheet of newsprint ripped from the Daily Mail by a kindly steward. "You done yet, pal?" came a gruff call, and suddenly beams of powerful torchlight was shining on me, very clearly defining my arse, and accompanied by the screams and laughter of girls, their attention drawn by stewards with comic intention. "Here, have a look at this, girls," I heard as the audience and laughter increased. I was quite panicked and hurriedly spurred as well as embarrassed, but at least the stewards had let me shit in the dark before shining their torches for a lark, although on later contemplation it wasn't much of a consolation. I vacated the spot and tried to find my way back to our tent and hopefully clear, but was very soon hopelessly lost midst tents identically designed. I'd have more chance in a dark house, blindfolded in search of a mouse. But there was a reference point. The crown of the marquee dome, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky since sundown, and I figured out a very safe bet. Judging our tent to be 100 or so yards, give or take, I wandered a radius of that distance, and after a mile or 10 found Troy and Graham by a pile of dead bonfire debris and still asleep. From there my mission was as easy as pie. I left them to oblivious shut-eye, found the tent, unzipped the front, had a peep, saw Claire naked, Jim lying underneath, and stared frozen in shocked disbelief. Jim evidently cared not a jot. I pulled myself away from the spot and heard cries of abandonment and joy. I spent the next hours tired and worn in the marquee dome till 8 in the morning. Upon my return, found Claire had gone, Jim looking smug with all his clothes on, and there was Troy and Graham as well, friends reunited. Outsiders might say, looking back now, things were never that way. We walked to the main gate, queued for a spell, and when we got in, Jim and Troy found no reason to stay and left homeward bound. I took a drag on the not too tightly rolled joint, replayed last night's events in my head, then, if I remember rightly, I fell asleep and dreamed of tents, hippies, Claire, a mouse, Jim, Troy, and a bag of shit. I awoke, scrounged another fag from Graham, watched Chaz and Dave, the first and I'm sorry to say by far the worst support act, followed by Keith Richards' band and Todd Rundgren, and if either were good I can't recall, but from where we stood they appeared as small as ants, and any further details could be perused on Google, which indeed I've used. Led Zeppelin were kind of okay. They sounded a bit tired, but my main gripe was that they were too far away. I'd rather have seen them again in a smaller venue, but as I've said, John Bonham next year would be sadly dead. And in spite of my griping memory, I can still say I saw the legendary band's very last UK performance before they changed their original lineup. And to the end, this story of mine is a verse typed in accordance with Wiki and in dedication to John, a great drummer, too prematurely gone. The song remains the same. Celebration Day, Black Dog, Nobody's Fault But Mine. Led Zeppelin played a compilation at Nebworth in 1979 of classics, opening with the above and closing with A Whole Lot of Love. A heartfelt thanks for 11 years was drowned by 200,000 cheers, and on the way home in the morning train I fancy my ears were deafened ringing. Most likely I was silently singing songs indelibly stamped on my brain, and 40 years later they're still there, as are, it would seem, Roy, Graham, Jim and Claire.